The sound of hurried footsteps echoed through the hospital corridor, moving faster than usual. April Wilson had been restless ever since she received a call from her father. "Miss Wilson, you look lovely today." An elderly patient greeted her warmly as she passed the nurse's station. April paused, offering a kind smile as she tucked a loose strand of brown hair behind her ear. "Take care," she responded softly. Her reassuring presence was something her patients had come to depend on. With 7 years of experience as a nurse, her simple scrubs and petite frame, just over 5 feet tall, gave off a quiet competence that put people at ease. But today, something was different. The usual peace in her expression was overshadowed by something heavier, something unsettled. In the break room, she let out a deep sigh, staring down at the message on her phone. "We're having a family meeting tomorrow. Catherine will be there too." Her chest tightened at the mention of her sister's name. It had been 3 years since she had last seen her. Through the hospital window, the autumn leaves of Cambridge painted the scenery in shades of gold and red. That same season, 3 years ago, had changed everything. Catherine, tall, striking, with her signature blonde hair, was everything April was not. Dressed in luxury brands, face always perfectly made up, she thrived in her career as a high-end real estate agent. She lived for social connections, constantly flaunting her extravagant lifestyle on social media. And then there was Michael. Even now, just thinking of her ex-husband's name made April's stomach tighten. Michael had been an up-and-coming cardiologist, admired for his skill and ambition. Tall, sharp-featured, always impeccably dressed, he was the envy of the hospital staff. But beneath that polished surface lay a calculating and controlling nature. Her father, Joseph, was nothing like Michael. A distinguished cardiac surgeon, he was mild-mannered yet strong-willed, his graying hair and warm gaze carrying the weight of decades spent saving lives. He had always been a pillar of their family. But now, in retirement, he should have been enjoying a peaceful life. So why had he called for a sudden family meeting? Since losing her mother 3 years ago, everything in their family had shifted. Her mother had been the heart of their home, kind, selfless, even as she battled rheumatoid arthritis. She had cared for her family until the very end. Catherine had abandoned her when she needed her most. And now, after all these years, why was she coming back? "April, can you help with blood draws on the 4th floor?" A colleague's voice pulled her back to reality. She stood up, shaking off her thoughts. She was known for her dedication, her reliability, her ability to keep moving forward no matter what. Even as the evening sky outside darkened, casting long shadows across the hospital floor, a quiet unease settled in her chest. The next day would bring answers. But April had a feeling she would not like them. She had met Michael at Mount Auburn Hospital 5 years ago, on a spring afternoon. "Is this seat taken?" She had looked up to see him standing there, smiling. At the time, he had already built a reputation in the cardiology department. Conversations between them started casually, small talk in the cafeteria, the occasional overlap in shifts. But soon, those encounters became intentional. "How about dinner?" he had asked one evening. Their first date was at a high-end Italian restaurant, where the course meal and dim candlelight had made her nervous. But Michael had been charming, gentle, reassuring. Over time, her walls came down. Their weekends became filled with long walks along the Charles River, quiet afternoons at the Boston Museum, whispered dreams about the future. "I have been waiting for someone as sincere as you," he had told her on the night he proposed. They were in a restaurant near Harvard Square. Outside, the autumn leaves swirled in the wind. She had cried when he placed the ring on her finger. Their wedding was beautiful. A church ceremony blessed by both families. April in her white gown, her mother smiling through tears. Catherine, standing as her maid of honor, had smiled, too. Looking back now, April realized there had been something calculating in that smile. At first, their married life had been everything she had dreamed. She packed him lunches every morning. They enjoyed weekend brunches together. She made apple pie from her mother's old recipe, Michael's favorite. On a vacation to Cape Cod, They had stared up at the starry sky, whispering about forever. She had believed him. But the changes had come quickly. At first, they were subtle. Michael started coming home later and later, always blaming work. Even on holidays, he would rush off to the hospital, claiming urgent surgeries. Then the comments started. I wish we could eat at nicer restaurants like Catherine does. As a nurse, you cannot keep up with my social circle. Catherine has much better taste than you. Do you not agree? April endured it. Slowly, all the household responsibilities fell onto her shoulders. The credit card bills from expensive restaurants piled up. But still, she endured it. Because she loved him. Because she thought this was just a rough patch. But then, her mother's condition worsened. And everything truly fell apart. Catherine always had an excuse. She was too busy with work, had too many appointments, too many clients to please. And so, the burden of caregiving fell solely on April's shoulders. I'm sorry, but visiting hours are over. Even as the nurses reminded her, April could not bring herself to leave her mother's bedside. She assisted with repositioning, feeding, and comforting her mother through the long, painful nights. She was not just a daughter anymore, she was also a nurse, using every bit of her training to care for the woman who had once done everything for her. April, staying so late again? Her mother's voice was weak, filled with guilt. April forced a smile. It is okay, Mom. I want to be here. Balancing her job at the hospital and caring for her mother was beyond exhausting, but she endured it because she loved her. Michael, however, grew increasingly distant. You are staying at the hospital again? He snapped one evening. I need attention too, you know. She was too tired to argue. Why do you not just put her in a facility? He suggested another time, exasperated. That is what they are for. Those conversations became routine. And each time, she ignored the growing feeling that something was wrong. Then, one night, everything fell apart. After finishing an overtime shift, April walked to the hospital parking lot, fumbling for her keys. That was when she saw them. Two familiar figures sat together in a luxury car, illuminated by the dashboard lights. They were leaning in close, too close. Then, to her horror, Catherine threw her head back in laughter, her hand brushing against Michael's chest. April's feet froze in place. Catherine. And Michael. Catherine glanced up, spotting her. But instead of guilt, she smirked. Oh my, did we get caught? She laughed, her voice echoing in the cold night air. Michael, still holding her hand, met April's gaze with a defiant expression. Well, he said smoothly, I guess it is over. Let us get divorced. His tone was emotionless, as if he had been waiting for this moment. The divorce was entirely on his terms. Michael demanded an obscene amount in alimony while Catherine launched a smear campaign against April, calling their parents daily to slander her. Social media was flooded with photos of the two of them, dining at exclusive restaurants, vacationing in Europe, shopping for designer clothes. Did you really not see it coming? A plain woman like you could never satisfy Michael. Catherine's words were venomous, each one a dagger to April's already shattered heart. Then, just when things could not get worse, April's mother's condition deteriorated. The stress of betrayal, grief, and exhaustion took its toll. Her mother passed away within weeks. In her final moments, she whispered, I am sorry. April squeezed her frail hand, her vision blurred with tears. For what, Mom? But her mother was too weak to answer. Catherine never came to the funeral. After that, April packed up what little she had left and moved into a small, one-bedroom apartment near the hospital. It was clean, simple, chosen for practicality, not comfort. She did not look back. The wedding ring Michael had once placed on her finger was gone. In its place, she now wore the delicate gold ring her mother had left her. 3 years passed. 12-hour shifts at the hospital became her routine. The days blurred into each other. Every once in a while, she would catch glimpses of Catherine and Michael's life on social media. Lavish parties, luxury apartments, expensive cars. It was as if they were deliberately flaunting their happiness for her to see. What a beautiful family! Such a perfect couple! April would scroll past the comments without a second glance. Her only real contact with her father came through monthly phone calls or birthday visits. He never pushed her to reconnect. Focus on healing, he had told her once. Take your time. She had followed his advice. Until one day, the phone rang. I want to have a family meeting, her father said. I have already contacted Catherine. April's breath caught in her throat. A family meeting. Catherine and Michael's response was immediate. Catherine booked a luxury hotel, and Michael started reaching out to lawyers. They were expecting a discussion about inheritance. April did not care about money. But something about the urgency in her father's voice made her uneasy. The taxi pulled up to the family home, the grand Victorian-style house standing just as she remembered it. The white fence still enclosed the rose bushes her mother had lovingly tended to. They had been trimmed back for the winter, but their presence was still strong, a reminder of the woman who had once held everything together. April hesitated before stepping inside. Something was different. The living room had changed, small details she would not have noticed if she had not been so familiar with the house. Then, in her father's study, she saw them. Stacks of documents, neatly arranged. Hospital security footage, unpaid bills from her mother's care facility, printed copies of text messages. On the computer screen, multiple PDF files were open. She frowned. Dad, what is all this? Her father turned to her, his salt and pepper hair slightly disheveled, his eyes holding a quiet determination. I have been gathering evidence, he said simply. She looked down at the documents again. Messages from Catherine, refusing to pay for their mother's care. Hospital footage showing April, alone, day after day, without any visits from her sister. And social media posts, lavish vacations, expensive shopping sprees, all while their mother had been struggling. Today was the day everything would come to light. Before she could process it all, the doorbell rang. The sharp sound of expensive heels clicked against the hallway floor. Then two familiar voices filled the space. Still single, I see, Catherine sneered. Ugly as ever, Michael added. April's body tensed, but her father remained calm. The Wilson family living room still held its quiet dignity. Family photos lined the walls. The soft melody of her mother's favorite classical piece played in the background. The scent of fresh coffee filled the air. Catherine and Michael settled into the large sofa as if they owned the house. Catherine crossed her legs, casually swinging her designer heels. Michael leaned back, bored, glancing around as if he had better things to do. April sat quietly, her simple dress making her look as modest as ever. But unlike 3 years ago, she was no longer weak. She did not lower her gaze. She did not shrink back. Catherine smirked. Father, I have already spoken with our lawyers regarding the inheritance. But April's father raised a hand, cutting her off. Before we talk about that, he said, his voice steady, there is something I need to show you both. April glanced at him, then back at the evidence stacked on the table. For the first time in years, she saw something flicker in Catherine and Michael's expressions. Uncertainty. They had come expecting an easy victory. But they had no idea what was waiting for them. Catherine's voice dripped with false sweetness. Father, I have already spoken with our lawyers regarding the inheritance. April's father sat still, his expression unreadable. Michael, ever the smooth talker, added, Yes, we have been thinking about the future. April, who had remained quiet, noticed the subtle shift in her father's demeanor. He stood up slowly, the evening light casting a solemn glow on his graying hair. Perfect timing, he said, his voice steady but filled with an underlying strength. I have something important to discuss. Catherine's smirk wavered. Michael's confidence faltered. For the first time, they exchanged uneasy glances. Their father inhaled deeply before speaking. I have terminal pancreatic cancer. A thick silence settled over the room. April had already been told. Though it hurt, she had prepared herself for this moment. But Catherine and Michael? Their reactions were starkly different. Shock, panic, and something else, calculation. Michael, being a doctor, understood immediately. His professional mind processed the severity of the condition in an instant. Catherine, though visibly shaken, quickly recovered. "Father, we will take care of you," she said hurriedly, as if she could smooth this over with pretty words. Michael nodded. "I can arrange the best treatment," he added, eager to reaffirm his medical authority. But their father simply raised a hand, silencing them both. "That will not be necessary." He turned and walked to his study. From a drawer, he pulled out an envelope. It was thick, with a notary's seal clearly visible. "I want you both to see this." The sound of the envelope tearing open was deafening in the otherwise silent room. Catherine's lips parted slightly. Her hands twitched in her lap. Then she saw what was inside. Her face turned pale. Michael leaned forward, scanning the documents. His forehead creased, his usual arrogance slipping away. Their father laid everything out on the table, one by one. "These are records of your mother's care expenses," he said evenly. "Catherine, you received $5,000 a month for her medical costs." A series of bills were spread out before them, chronologically arranged. 3 years of unpaid notices from Mount Auburn Care Facility. But no payments were ever made, their father continued. The evidence was damning. Catherine flinched as one document after another revealed the truth. Red-lettered final warnings from the care home. Notes from staff expressing concern over their mother's deteriorating condition. "This must be some mistake," Catherine stammered. Her voice lacked its usual confidence. Their father turned the computer screen toward them. "It is no mistake," he said, his voice sharper now. Displayed on the screen were bank statements, evidence of every misused dollar. Expensive designer purchases. Luxury hotel stays. First-class flights. Car payments. The money meant for their mother had been funding Catherine and Michael's extravagant lifestyle. Their father's gaze shifted to Michael. "And you?" he said coldly. Michael's fingers curled slightly, his professional mask slipping. "You falsified medical certificates," their father continued. "You deliberately understated your mother-in-law's conditions so she would not receive the care she needed. You downplayed her pain, ignored her symptoms, and left her to suffer." Michael's throat bobbed as he swallowed. As a doctor, you knew exactly what you were doing." Michael fell silent. Between them, a diary was placed on the table. Their mother's diary. A delicate book, its pages filled with handwritten words from a woman who had suffered in silence. Their father opened it to the final entries. His voice wavered slightly as he read aloud. "Today, I tried calling Catherine again. She did not answer. I do not want to burden April anymore. She has done enough. I spoke to Michael, but he refused to listen. The pain in my heart hurts more than my body ever could." April's vision blurred with tears. Catherine's face twisted. Her expensive mascara streaked down her cheeks. But their father was not done. Next, he played security footage from the hospital. The date was unmistakable. The day their mother was in critical condition. The footage showed the hospital's entrance. But Catherine and Michael were not there. Instead, the screen displayed something else. A luxury restaurant. Michael and Catherine, arriving in their finest clothes, clinking glasses of wine. The timestamp was merciless. Catherine's breath hitched. "We had work that day," she tried to argue, her voice weak. Their father opened another tab on the computer. "Work?" he repeated. "Then explain this." The screen showed a social media post from that same night. "Having the best night ever. Wine glass sparkles #luxury dining #perfect couple." Michael's face turned to stone. Catherine's lips parted, but no words came. Their father's gaze remained cold. "Mother waited for you both," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "She waited until the very end." A silence heavier than before filled the room. Then, their father took out the final document. His will. It was thick, legally binding, and bore the mark of a notary. Catherine and Michael's expressions froze as they realized what it meant. All assets, their father announced, his voice unwavering, will be inherited by April. The weight in the room was suffocating. April's father let the final words settle before standing, his movements slow but resolute. I have set conditions for you both, he announced, his voice even, unwavering. Catherine's eyes narrowed. Conditions? First, an apology at your mother's grave. Second, full repayment of the money you embezzled. He paused for a moment before delivering the final blow. And lastly, the funds I had set aside for my treatment will all be donated. Catherine shot to her feet so suddenly that her designer handbag tumbled to the floor. That is illegal, she shrieked. You think you have inheritance rights? Their father asked coldly, his sharp gaze locking onto her. Do you truly believe you are entitled to anything after what you did to your mother? Michael's face drained of color. His hands twitched as panic spread through him. If this became public, his entire career, his carefully built reputation, would crumble. This is not over, he said quickly. We have lawyers. Legally, their father did not flinch. All the evidence has already been filed with my attorneys. Copies have been sent to the appropriate legal offices. A cold silence fell. The message was clear. They had two choices: accept the conditions or face the full force of the law. Catherine and Michael did not speak. The crackling fire in the hearth cast long shadows across the room. Outside, the snow continued to fall, burying the last remnants of a family that had once been whole. The brooch their mother had treasured, the one she had worn to every special occasion, now lay untouched in its case, a silent witness to the end of an era. 1 year later, April stood in the garden of her childhood home, inhaling the crisp spring air. The roses her mother had cherished were beginning to bloom, their delicate petals opening to the sunlight. She had moved back into the house after her father's passing, creating a new life within its familiar walls. Miss Wilson, congratulations on becoming head nurse. April turned and smiled at her colleague. 7 years of dedication had finally earned her the promotion. Patients and staff alike trusted her deeply. Your kindness helped me through my recovery, Miss Wilson, an elderly patient had told her just the other day. Each time she heard words like that, she thought of her mother. Her mother had been both gentle and strong. She had shaped April into the woman she was today. The final 3 months with her father had been invaluable. The caregiving was difficult, long nights managing his medications, preparing his meals, making sure he was as comfortable as possible. But it had also been a time of deep love. One afternoon, as the sun streamed through the window, he had opened an old photo album. April, shall we look at these together? Page after page held the past. Her father and mother young and full of hope. Little Catherine and April on the beach at Cape Cod. Christmas mornings spent in front of the fireplace. Smiling faces frozen in time. You and your mother, her father had said softly, his voice filled with love, were my greatest pride. Those were the last words he ever spoke to her. On a peaceful spring morning, as gentle sunlight bathed his room, he passed away, holding a photo of his wife in his hands. Catherine and Michael's world had crumbled. Their luxury apartment went into foreclosure. The glamorous life they had flaunted was gone. Michael's reputation at the hospital shattered. Unable to bear the whispers and cold stares of his colleagues, he was forced to transfer to a small clinic in the countryside. Catherine's real estate career nosedived. Without her high-status lifestyle, her wealthy clients disappeared. One by one, the people she had called friends abandoned her. Their marriage, once built on greed and deception, collapsed. You ruined everything. Catherine spat at Michael. No, you did. He fired back. They blamed each other until there was nothing left to salvage. The last time April saw them was at their mother's grave. As required by the will, they had come to apologize. All their former arrogance had vanished. They were just two lost, broken people. April stood quietly, watching them. She felt no hatred, no anger, just the deep, quiet irony of life. Now, as she sat on a wooden bench in her father's garden, the scent of roses drifted on the breeze. She glanced down at her hand. Her mother's gold ring gleamed in the sunlight. Tending this garden was more than a chore, it was a way of preserving family history. Cooking the meals her mother once made was a way of keeping her love alive. Each small, daily act was part of her healing. She tilted her head back, looking up at the clear blue sky. Dad! Mom! Her voice was soft, carried away by the wind. I am happy! The birds sang in response. The newly blossomed flowers swayed gently. The past had not broken her. It had made her stronger. Inside the house, her mother's favorite piece, Air on the G string, played softly in the background. April closed her eyes and smiled. The spring light wrapped around her, warm and full of promise.